And welcome to this workshop of the Board of Education. Tonight, the board will hear updates from Superintendent of Schools Dr. Mark Bedell and Anne Arundel County Public Schools staff on their work with the iReady diagnostic assessment used in math and reading in kindergarten through 8th grade. Tonight's workshop is open to the public, but no public questions or comments will be taken. The workshop is being broadcast live on AACPS TV, which can be found on channel 96 on Comcast and Astound, and channel 36 on Verizon. High-definition broadcast can be seen on channel 996 on Comcast, channel 496 on Astound, and channel 2136 on Verizon. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Bedell.
Thank you, Madam President. Good evening to everybody who's here, those who are online viewing this board workshop. Today, we will go into our annual update on our iReady adaptive assessment instrument. For this presentation, we will have Dr. Marquise Duarte, Chief Academic Officer, and our Assistant Superintendent over Curriculum Instruction, Michelle Batten. So I'll pass it over to you all to get into it.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Bedell, and good evening, President Tobin, Vice President Silkworth, and members of our distinguished Board of Education. My name is Dr. Marquise Duarte, and I'm the proud Chief Academic Officer for Anne Arundel County Public Schools. I'm here with my colleague, and I will allow her to introduce herself.
Good evening, Michelle Batten, Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction.
So, the primary purpose of tonight's presentations is to ensure you are all well informed of the aims and intents, as well as the usefulness and impact of iReady here in Anne Arundel County Public Schools. Hence, we will be discussing iReady in the context of the why, the what, the when, and the how, and we will certainly be happy to field any questions you may have as we wrap up. Before we jump into the actual contents of the presentation, we thought it would be prudent to offer you some key terms and vocabulary. While there are several important purposes associated with the use of iReady, we wanted to start first by sharing these data associated with its predictive validity. As you can see, iReady scores are highly correlated with MCAT, both reading and math assessments, which we know are the primary means used to justify our school system standing. These strong correlations give way to predictive models that provide us insight so that system officials, school leaders, and teachers know as early as September in a given school year what supports will be needed by which students to help them reach grade level standards. Having these data early in the school year is a valuable tool and resource for our teachers so that we can ensure teaching and learning is happening at a high level. Now that we understand the why, we can move into the what. iReady features 3 key components, as noted. iReady offers students in grades K through 8 math and reading supports and resources. The program is adaptive, meaning it uses a diagnostic to gauge student ability levels and then provides instructional resources linked directly to each student's specific learning needs. These resources are called MyPath, as well as what they're called Teacher Toolbox. More specifically, not only does iReady Diagnostic allow us to predict how students will perform on MCAP and on grade level standards, it also allows us to understand student learning needs at the individual level and provide instructional resources, as mentioned, MyPath and the Teacher Toolbox. Each of these resources is designed to address students' individual learning needs. You'll hear more about these 2 instructional resources in the subsequent slides. But generally speaking, the program strikes a balance between offering computer adaptive resources aligned to the diagnostic, as well as a teacher toolbox, which provides easy to use and easily accessible lessons that teachers can use for small groups or individual students based on the teacher's discretion and their judgment. Lastly, iReady allows us to measure growth over time, meaning we can see more than just how a student is performing grade level standards. We can actually measure growth over that time period and see what value we are adding to student learning. It is also important to note that the iReady Diagnostic is designed both as a criterion referenced assessment banked against learning standards, as well as a norm reference assessment that allows us to compare our students to students both around the state and around the country.
As mentioned, the iReady diagnostic tool assesses both math and reading. The assessment's content is directly aligned to the Maryland College and Career Readiness Standards. With the data that shows the correlation of the diagnostic with MCAP, this standard alignment reinforces the ability to predict student performance on MCAP. It also allows teachers an opportunity to intervene with instructional supports when students demonstrate they have not quite mastered the grade level standards. As reflected on this slide, you see the domains that are assessed for each of the math and the reading assessment. To progress monitor student growth throughout the year, the diagnostic assessment is administered 3 times. The beginning of the year diagnostic assessment helps teachers to see where students are when they start their year. It also provides us an opportunity to set the typical and stretch growth. The middle of the year diagnostic is used to measure the learning that has taken place in the first half of the school year. After taking the middle of the year diagnostics, students should show at least a 50% growth towards their typical growth measure and aim for their stretch growth. Then at the end of the school year, the diagnostic measures the full year of learning. The iReady diagnostic places students in one of 5 levels based on their performance. This chart provides guidance to our school-based leaders and teachers for analysis of the data, student readiness for grade level content, and/or indicate gaps that may appear in their learning. Based on each level, you will see performance descriptors and expectations of iReady use. For example, students exhibiting gaps in their learning are required 30 to 50 minutes per week on MyPath. Students demonstrating grade level performance benefit from differentiated on or above grade level instruction. The instructional MyPath is created from the diagnostic scores. The computer selects personalized lessons for students to complete based on the learning they exhibited on the diagnostic. These lessons are individualized, interactive, and adjust for each student. The teacher toolbox lessons are provided to address specific skills to meet individual student needs. Teachers use these lessons to adjust instruction in real time. Teacher-led lessons support students in small groups or in a one-on-one setting. Here you will see reflected the mathematics scores over the last 3 years at the fall diagnostic. Across the board, it shows an increase in the percent of students who are ready for on grade level or above grade level instruction. We see a similar pattern in the reading data over the last 3 years. You will notice about 20% of all students placed in the mid to above grade level category, seen here in dark green. We know that families are a huge part of our student success. Therefore, we provide families with resources around this robust program. We have an AACPS iReady website that has information for parents on the diagnostic as well as frequently asked questions. We have family reports that are provided after students take each diagnostic assessment, and videos are available in both English and Spanish to unpack the information found in the report. At this time, if you have any questions, we are here to assist you.
Thank you. Thank you both. So I will, as is our usual practice in these workshops, I will go according to roll call order and ask each of my colleagues to ask their first couple of questions. And if they have additional questions, we can come back to you. So tonight, the first person is Mr. Silkworth.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for the presentation. So I'm not an iReady expert. I'm not. I know we have many in the county. But I do read and I do listen to a lot of things. I've heard some good. I've heard some bad. Heard that perhaps iReady may in fact stifle advanced learners. Do you think that's true?
So, great question. We've had a lot of conversation in district around that this past school year. So, this year we released iReady expectation and guidance to clarify the best uses of iReady for students, and we've given that to our school-based administrators to share with teachers as an expectation. So that being said, we do realize that when you're dealing with students who are above grade level, iReady is not necessarily the best adaptive tool to use for those students. We have looked at some other products that we're using to supplement their enrichment as opposed to iReady. So the guidance as given to our administrators back in August was that iReady is not really to be used. So when you're looking for an additional instructional resource to help students, it's not to use iReady. We have a different program that's called First in Math that we're using at some of our schools, particularly for those students that are advanced or beyond grade level.
Well, thank you. So you did answer my second question, which what other tools are we considering as we evaluate iReady? And I have one more. Okay. Any tool that is used by our great teachers is in fact a tool. How much do our teachers actually leeway do they have to use iReady? And also in terms of our teachers, what do you think the buy-in rate from our teachers would be? Because when you implement a program, if your teachers are just absolutely not sold on it, and I'm not saying our teachers are not, I'm asking the question. How much buy-in do you think our teachers have with iReady?
That's a great question, Mr. Silkworth. I think that depends on the individual. I'd say we're close to, with our guidance and expectations, I'd say we're close to 80%, but that's purely my, my perception.
And Mrs. Silkworth, coming from a position where I worked directly with schools and school principals the past couple of years, I think it is a little varied. I do think there's buy-in to use the program. I think we had to provide more clarification and guidance on how to use it effectively. So I don't think there was an absence of wanting to use the program in grades, particularly grades 3 through 8 or K through 8. It was more of a how do we use this and integrate it effectively with our core instructional program. And that's the work that we did this past fall and trying to shore up how it's used. So I think there was a desire to use it. And again, this is anecdotal based on the 20 some odd schools I worked with the past couple of years, but I don't think it was a lack of interest. It was a lack of maybe clear guidance on how to best use it without compromising the integrity of the core instructional program.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Ellis.
Thank you. So this is one of those topics I probably have a million questions. So I'll have to pick and choose for the moment. Thank you for the presentation. Okay, how do I, so we have heard from many parents, particularly since COVID and putting kids on computers, screen time more and more. There've been, a number of concerns raised by parents and teachers, and also as we become so skills focused in education, and this is a decades-long trend. There's a concern about the opportunities for deeper learning. So my question is, what is your case, or what is your understanding of how this is not teaching to the test rather than developing that deeper understanding?
So I would begin by saying we focus right now more on core instruction. So again, this goes back to this is a tool that we are using as a supplemental, and so it does not provide that direct core instruction that we expect all students to be participating in. So therefore, we have been very specific in our expectations about the amount of time students are participating in My Path, which is on the screen. But then there's also the teacher toolbox, which are direct lessons that are in addition to the core instruction. So that piece is not part of the computer program.
Okay. And I heard you mention 30 to 50 minutes per week.
Mm-hmm.
That's for students who have gaps. Is that what you said? Did I understand
Correct.
that right?
Those are the students that have performed under a diagnostic below grade level.
And so those who are on or above, how much time are they spending with this program?
I'm sorry. Oh, there's a little more flexibility with that. So the guidance around how you use iReady to accelerate students who have some learning deficits is 30 to 50 minutes per week. The students who are on grade level, not above, because we talked about it with Mr. Silkworth, above grade level requires a different program and different set of resources and materials. The students who are on grade level, there's a little more flexibility with that. I would imagine most schools are using about that 30-minute window to kind of say, okay, we're going to do 30 minutes. Let's do it across the board, because it creates an even kind of small group rotation, you would say, in terms of supporting those students. So the guidance is 30 to 50 minutes because that's where the research stipulates that we'll see outcomes for those particular students. And then, of course, it individualizes its instructional resources and the questions and skills that students will be exposed to. So even if they're on grade level, they're still seeing value from engaging with iReady. But to your point, we don't want to do an overkill. It can't replace, to Mrs. Batten's point, core instruction. So it should be a situation where students are sitting in iReady for 30, 45 minutes a day. It really needs to be 10, 15-minute rotations as part of a bigger instructional block where students are rotating through different instructional activities, most of which should be teacher-led and really should align back to the core instructional program.
Let me just chime in on this one because I think one of the things you said, Miss Ellis, is this more about teaching to the test? And I can tell you 100% it isn't. This diagnostic tool is used to help us determine whether students are able to access grade level standards. If they can't access grade level standards and we have not been able to diagnose what they're missing, that makes it very difficult to then provide the interventions that we need that ultimately will allow for them to access their standards and give them a better shot at being successful on the MCAP at the end of the year. But this is a tool designed to help us set those goals, that they have general goals that they need to be able to reach, and then they have stretch goals that they have to reach. And so the tool gives, it's a way for us to really be able to help respond to kids who aren't standard ready, in particular, but not to teach to a particular test.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that, we did hear from a student whose one of the concerns he had was that what he's doing on iReady is not aligned with what he's doing in the classroom,
Yeah.
working on two different
Miss-
skill sets at
it-
the same time. So
Yeah.
that's
And that's part of the programmatic design, right? So
Okay.
students are being exposed to grade level standards in their core instruction with the teacher every day. iReady is designed to backfill, for lack of a better expression, those skills that students may be lacking. To, in essence, you want to do both at the same time. You want to expose to grade level standards,
Mhm.
and then you want to backfill and catch them up, to Dr. Bedell's point. So the skills are going to help them more effectively access the grade level standards, but we don't want to take the grade level standards away. So you are in some ways going to see both things happening simultaneously.
Okay. And you had a slide about test scores and showed some increases. Are those scores on the iReady diagnosis? Okay.
Correct.
It's not that it's not correlating to the MCOP.
No.
Okay.
What you
Yeah,
saw was the beginning of the
Fall.
year diagnostic.
Right.
yes.
Right. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Corkadell.
Thank you. I likewise have more than two questions, but we'll start here. My first question is actually kind of utilitarian, but I think relevant to some of the general conversations that our communities are having right now. And that is part of your presentation. And I recall when we first adopted as a board the iReady system for acquisition, some of the things that were discussed was that it would be responsive to the student based on the outcomes of that tool. And I am curious, is that using a dynamic AI algorithm, or is that using an input-based standard like C++ type of algorithm? And I say that because, how we integrate AI, I think we need to be mindful of community conversation. Now, this has been around for a while, but so has some of the more infantile versions of AI. And I am curious as to whether we are dealing with a static thing where if this data comes in, then this is what we do next, or if it is dynamically creating a more holistic profile as it evolves with the student.
So thank you for the question. It is basically adjusting to the student's performance on each diagnostic. So it will continue to move the student forward based on their performance. So it's very individualized based, and then adjust each time the student takes the diagnostic so they know where the gaps are or moving forward. And there are students that vary on their time limit on the assessment, on the diagnostic, varying depending on the number of questions they answer.
So
Okay.
I believe, Ms. Corkadell, the question, let me try to see if I can add to Mrs. Batten's response. So I don't think, and this is speculative based on use. Now, I've had some familiarity with iReady going back to 2014 in another school district. I don't think it's generative AI as we're talking about nowadays. That's become, I think, much more prominent in media discussions. I think it's much more of an if-then. So it has a finite, limited number of if-then variables it's running. So if the student's performing at this level, then you provide this set of equations or this set of additional questions as a follow-up. So I don't think it's pulling information from multiple sources like an AI would do. I don't think it's surfing the web and pulling information. I think it's a matter of, it's a finite, if students perform on this, then you provide this. If they perform at X, you provide Y in terms of the next question. If
Okay, so
they
it
do
is
Y,
that
right.
straight input-based algorithm.
To my
that
understanding,
does
yes, but we
a
certainly can look into
determination.
that. But to my understanding, yes.
Okay. No, that makes sense. And I say that also because, you know, how does that information carry over from as the student evolves? Is that part of their record? Like the total profile of the student? Does that end up as like part of their record that carries from year to year and on their transcript as any type of performance?
No,
Oh,
it's not part of any transcript.
So when a student gets dismissed from an IEP, all future teachers of that student usually don't even know that that existed. Is with iReady, it sounds like it's moving, it's following the student. Is that correct? So this is something that's following them from year to year as they progress?
No, each year they reassess on the beginning year of the diagnostic. So it doesn't start from when they ended the year before, because again, it's being assessed on grade level standards. So it's specific to that grade level. And the only reports that we have are internal reports that our data team compiled for us, but that is just for data analysis.
So
But
I
the-
am curious, the non-educator in the room here, why we would not want to build on the prior year's deficiencies and continue that skill set. I understand the diagnostic piece and the value that it brings, but if it is also being used to build the students' actual skills, why then? And I always had the same question with my student when their IEP was dismissed. Why wouldn't educators be made aware of that as part of the student's education profile? And
So at the school level, we have our articulation meetings. So certainly that information is shared among a school team as far as an articulation process, but it is not necessarily contained in their file. But again, it goes back to determining where the student is starting each year with that particular grade level and the skills that are necessary to be successful on those grade level standards.
And I
Oh,
guess
yeah.
I'm certain that the most recent information is being used to make those decisions on how a student's IEP will be developed.
Well, I'm not saying necessarily just for the IEP, but I mean, just in general, we have these tools and information on our students as it relates to their educational aptitude and potential, and also where there are deficiencies. So I guess I kind of almost thought that this was going to be that tool that would bridge that communication silo that occurs when a student goes from one grade to the other. So
So,
I
Well,
was,
I'll let you answer. I
Yeah.
mean,
so
but
I am just.
go ahead.
You sure?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Mhm.
sure.
Ms. Corker, I mean, that's a very instructive question. So I think the program is actually doing sort of what you're asking about, right? And
Okay.
so the reason we do a fall diagnostic that's early in the school year, these diagnostics are taking place the first 2 weeks of school, okay? That's giving you grade level specific data for that student in real time for that year that helps support that teacher teaching that particular student. So we could certainly look at prior year's data. So let's say we do the end of year in May. And I understand you're saying, why don't we just use that data? Well, in essence, the September data that we take of that same student on these new grade level standards is exactly what it's doing. It's doing what you're saying we should do. It's actually giving us a baseline for that year. So there is a through line between those things, because where they end in May is one thing, but where they begin in September is actually more impactful, because where they end in May is not always a good barometer for where they're starting in September, because we know we have summer learning loss. So the program is designed to give that diagnostic early in the school year to now inform school staff of where the student is relative at that time, but more specifically to those grade level expectations.
Gotcha. Okay. No, that makes sense. I just, I guess in my ideal little world, I would have more communication in as students are transitioning from year to year as to what of their education and academic profile. But that's probably for a different conversation. My second question is relating to the actual outcomes themselves. And I saw two screens relevant to that. One was the predictability of MCAP outcomes, and the other was a percentage of growth as it relates, I'm presuming, to the individual students. And that's like an aggregate percentage we saw. I mean, I don't have the whole thing in front of me to know to pull it back up again or anything.
Can we go back to
But-
that slide?
Yeah, there it is. So we're about 2 years we're 2 school years into this now. And so I guess my question, Dr. Bedell, is what is our desired outcome and how far along are we to that desired outcome of, is this what we anticipated and purchased in regards to outcome by percentages, or is this still an emerging? And then where will we expect it to be? Because are we looking at double digits in the future, or
I'm not certain. I'm looking for double digits at all. I think it's just being able to see where students are. I think
Okay.
every year you have a different cohort of students who are going to show up with different needs, different experiences. In terms of, are we where we want to be with iReady? I wasn't here when iReady was implemented, but one of the things that I've been told is, I think you heard Dr. Duarte say this earlier around making sure that people truly understand the power of this and how to use it. And I know that there's been a reset with that in terms of helping people to understand how this can help them. When we started doing our deep data dives last year, we focused on trying to run data to look at the correlation of iReady, because if iReady is not going to help us have some idea of within that standard deviation that we want to see how kids are going to perform, I think that's a whole different conversation. When you saw the 79% and 80%, which in research terms is significant, there's a significance there, tells us that the instrument is helping us get the proper information around where our kids are from a standard readiness standpoint. And then over the year, as they are performing on this, the goal is, you would hope that as the year goes, you will begin to see more increases in what's happening with the kids because of that skill development aspect of the instrument. But I did use iReady before I came to here. I used iReady in my previous school district, and it worked wonders for us because we implemented it the way that everybody bought into it, and the growth that we saw was off the charts. And that's what I'm hoping we'll be able to get out of this, that value added growth in understanding how to move our kids who are low achievers, our average learners, and then our high achievers, and being able to say, here are the other things that we have for our kids who are scoring off the scales of what iReady can offer. So that's really what I'm looking for. And then hopefully at the end of the year, we're seeing that 3 to 5% increase on how kids are performing on NCAPS. And because we've been able to be much more prescriptive because of this too.
I will table my other 2 questions for follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Schulheim.
Firstly, thank you for the presentation. Really appreciate it. I think I'm the only parent up here who's had a child who's used this consistently since JUMP, except for maybe Dr. Bedell. 1 year. Okay. All right. Well, since the beginning, since during COVID, as I remember, I think that's when it first came on the scene. And as a parent, I've had a pretty good feeling about it since the beginning. I appreciated its adaptability. One thing the one thing that has frustrated me though is so I get the score, right? Because I'm interested in the score. I'm a competitive person. My daughter's a competitive learner. And then what I don't normally see for quite some time is the accompanying norming table. That's really helpful. And I have to scour the internet to find this year's norming table. It's usually in some other place somewhere else. So I just have this number that's sort of meaningless as a parent. It's kind of meaningless as a parent. I'm like, okay, well, what does that number mean? And how does it relate to where you should be? Or are you on grade level? Are you above grade level? Are there gaps? What does that number mean? And so I would just ask going forward that we that parents get those norming tables early in the year for not just the fall diagnostic, but the one in the middle of the year and the one at the end of the year, so we can understand as a parent and be involved in our kids' education in that way. But yeah, I mean, my daughter's used this every year since its inception, and I thought it was, for every bit of horror that COVID was, I thought this was sort of a little bit of a bright spot. It provided some consistency. In terms of her use of it in the classroom versus her use of it at home, just for every of my colleagues' knowledge, they used to use it in elementary school sometimes in lieu of homework. So it'd be 30 minutes a week. And then whatever little bit they happen to do with it in class, but it was usually not used in class because the teacher was in the classroom doing the lesson. So it was used as a sort of in lieu of a pen and paper homework assignment. Now, I'm kind of happy for both, right? You know, you want pen and paper assignments, you want worksheets, you want those things. But then this was a nice bit of variety. Now, I don't know how popular like any of my comments will make me with the larger public. I do hear concerns about it. I do listen to those concerns. Some of our students love it, some of them hate it. I think that's probably the same with almost anything we do. But and I see these figures. I think it's a great supplemental tool, but it doesn't replace the teacher. But during that year of COVID, it certainly stopped the bleeding. In terms of learning that we were experiencing that year. So for that, I'm grateful. And I trust you all. I trust the process. And I think if we need more years of data to see if this is something we really want to move forward with longer term, great. But I look at this and I see improvement. There was just one grade, I think grade 7 for reading, that didn't see much improvement, but also didn't see like a drop off either. And so yeah, I mean, but 9% for grade 3. I mean, that's something to be proud of. And so yeah, I think it's a great tool in our overall toolkit. Not to replace pen and paper, and certainly not to replace teacher lessons. But yeah, so I don't really have any other questions because I've been using it for 3-4 years with my kids. So
And I
thank you.
did want to just respond to what you were saying. As a parent whose child's been doing this probably since 2018, the 30-minute piece was pivotal. There was, I don't know, for whatever reason, a lot more joy with her doing this in elementary than it is with her doing it in middle school right now.
100%.
So
Same.
that's just something for us to think about. But I'm just telling you from my own experiences, that excitement is not quite there like it was when she was in elementary.
Right. And then I'll say one more thing in terms of the other tools that we have in our toolkit, the first in math. My daughter's had experience with that as well. And so I think that there's a place for both of these resources in the larger kit of goods. But having those norming tables from jump would be a really big help. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Dent.
Thank you. So first of all, great presentation. I'm not in school, so iReady is kind of reminding me of SRA. That's it's boring. So anyway, I want to know, and that this is really for Dr. Duarte because he loves numbers. So when you're looking at iReady, one of the things that I was reading about is it said it was supposed to be designed to help close the equity gap. I know that's the buzzword for everything. That's not why I'm asking you this question. My question is that we've looked at the assessment as it pertains to how it perhaps may have the outcome of what our students are with the MCAP, but have we looked at it from an equity lens to see if the children that have access to it now have they improved as a result of having access to it over the years? And if the answer is no, that's okay. I was just wondering, was any data metrics in there that could give us the outcome of that I'm looking for?
So let me try to understand your question. So you're asking me if we looked at data through what lens? Through an equity lens to see
Equity.
if students who were accessing it.
That was closing the learning gap, right?
Yeah.
So before we had iReady, we had something,
Mhm.
right? And so we switched to iReady for some reason.
Mhm.
And so when you look at iReady, one of the first things it said is this, it's designed to close the equity gap,
Mhm.
right? So ultimately, what does that mean?
So I think in terms of, well, it is implied that students who have learning deficits, for lack of better expression, that if they use this program at the recommended levels, it will start to close the gap. That this is an opportunity for us to say, okay, how do we level the playing field? We have students who we know are behind grade level for a myriad of reasons. What tool do we have to help close that gap? And this is something that individualizes down to the student level, which is great as our teachers all are. It's very hard to individualize in real time quickly with 25 different students. This computer allows that to happen, right? So the teacher can focus on that core instruction we talked about, while this would actually backfill some of those deficits we talked about. Now, I think to answer another part of your question is what we do know is through the research we've gotten through curriculum associates and some of our own internal data, students who are we're seeing these gaps close are the ones who are getting recommended usage around not only just the time on or interfacing with iReady, but also the number of lessons passed, because that's really what we're looking for. Students passing a set number of lessons that will actually help them progress and catch up. Mrs. Batten talked briefly in her portion of the presentation about you've got your kind of annual goals, what we expect from students to grow in one particular calendar school year, but they also come with what's called stretch goals, because we know we have students sitting in, let's say, fourth grade that may be 2 grade levels behind. So they set stretch goals so that maybe in a course of 2 to 3 years, you can catch that student up versus that student always staying behind and not catching up. And that's what's instrumental in that is making sure that they're getting the right dosage of iReady with the right minutes and more importantly, the right right number of lessons passed. So I'm hoping I'm answering your question.
You all loaded them out with me, but I got you. You just triggered more questions, but I know
Okay.
I'm limited to 2.
Okay.
However, yes, you are answering my question. So the second part of that is there a metric that we can view that will be able to tell us if we're actually, so you used the term just then, say, so students 2 years behind.
Mhm.
So let's just feed that. So ideally, you really want the student to be, and I hope I'm not stealing your question. You want the student to be on grade level, right? That's what we're trying to get to. So if they're 2 years behind, right? So I'm asking, is there any metrics inside this system that will give us the outcomes that I'm looking for? How much of you closing it? Was a student before iReady, the student was taking 2 to 3 years to close this learning gap. Now with iReady, they're only taking 1 year to close this gap. I'm asking, is there a metric in there that will give me that kind of outcome?
Like how fast we're closing gaps
Right.
with this program versus prior programs.
Correct.
I'm not aware if we have that data or not. No.
Okay, I guess that's a long way to get to my question. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lynn.
So I was just curious for the students who are at least 1 grade level behind and in the red, like how does iReady like help them catch back up? Like what specifically about the program, like what does it do to help get those students on grade level?
So great question. With the diagnostic assessment, it quickly will drill down to the skills that the students have a deficit in. And so it builds the computer adaptive program from there based on those results. So that way, then it's providing those foundational skills that perhaps may be missing in the student's learning.
Okay, is that it, Mr. Lynn? All right, thank you. I have a couple of questions. So I think along the lines of some of what's been asked earlier, I am curious if we have or we plan to have as we move forward disaggregated data that can tell us how this is impacting different groups. Is that available or is that in the plan or?
It's available.
Okay,
Mhm.
because I would like to see that. I think that's important. And I think to Ms. Dent's question, just to put in a plug, I think it's always important when we buy something big and new that we build into our system some sort of way of measuring that big and new thing, not just within its own universe, but sort of what are the differences now? What has this brought us? Maybe what hasn't it brought us, whatever we may find. So I'm just going to put a plug in that in there for something. The other thing I want to ask about, Dr. Bedell's comment that his daughter in middle school is having less fun, I think, with iReady than maybe she did as an elementary student. And looking at the numbers, the increased numbers in middle school, I mean, those charts are always interesting because, by the time you get to grade 8, the red is a whole lot bigger. The deep green is also somewhat large. So you're sort of closing in on some kind of less of a middle. But I guess I'm curious if there isn't a developmental question about iReady for the middle school. It's my understanding in a very broad sense, right, that, your 3 to 6 year olds are very interested in categorizing things and counting things and so on. And your 6 to 11 year olds are very interested in getting these big concepts. But your 11, 12 to 15 year olds are really interested in seeing the practical impact of what they do in the world. And, we keep trying to figure out middle school, right? I mean, I'm just going to say that. And I guess I do wonder if it's worth at least thinking about whether or not iReady is developmentally appropriate in that sense. I mean, I understand the skills aspect. I've been evaluating public charter networks since 2014, 13-ish that have been using iReady. It's a very well-respected system, product throughout the school system. So I'm not trying to cast aspersions on iReady. But I just look at these numbers and I think, could we take a step back and think about this from maybe a different perspective and kind of meet these students while we're thinking about middle school broadly, which I think we are. Are we really meeting these students developmentally where we need to meet them? The skill issue is important, but there can be other ways to do that. And I don't know what the answer is, but it's a question that comes to my mind when I look at these numbers and I think about this. So,
I mean, point taken. And, I didn't say that to create some havoc up here. I'm just speaking my truth around what I'm experiencing as a parent. I'm like, hey, you going to do your iReady? And she's like, Dad. And it's just, I was like, you used to love iReady. What happened? And so it is something that we have to I agree. It made me think we have to take a look at just some of these things that we're doing overall. And we've been talking a lot about the middle school experience. We know that there is a lot of work in that space and opportunities for us to take advantage of as a school district. And so as we're having these conversations, Dr. Tobin, members of the board and the community, all of this will be taken into consideration. This is a big reason why we do these workshops and do these deep data dives, because generally they're going to bring some meaning. I mean, nobody wants to put on a chart that we've seen an increase of 0% of our 7th graders compared to last year, but it's the truth. This is the reality of it, and that tells you a story. Okay, what's happening there, from a connection standpoint with it, or even a motivational standpoint with it. And these are things that we will unpack as we continuously engage and get feedback from you all in the community.
thank you. Okay, we'll do our next go around. Mr. Silkworth.
Thank you, Dr. Tobin. So thank you, Ms. Dent. I'm a product of SRA. And I have to tell you, I loved it. I mean, I really did. I just wanted to get in there, and I just wanted to get as much done as I could. And to respond to Ms. Corkadell about the testing, beginning of the year, middle at the end, as an educator of a few years, I can tell you that where a student was at the end of the school year was not necessarily indicative of where they were going to be when they came back. And there are a lot of things that impact that. Maturation is one. Absolutely. I mean, I had some students that I can remember who were really struggling at the end of the school year that all of a sudden were going like gangbusters at the beginning. And so there are other factors. So that beginning evaluation is critical. And so it sounds like, I think I've heard this, that this is a great tool in our toolkit, And reminder that teachers are our experts. iReady is one tool. Some others up here on the dais mentioned some other tools, which sounds like they're being used. But that's after a focus on core instruction. That is a critical piece. And I'm going to end by saying that Dr. Bedell said he's used this in the past. And he said everyone bought into it. That's perhaps our biggest challenge, to make sure that everybody buys into it, because according to Dr. Bedell, it works wonders. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Ellis?
Thank you. I love our middle schoolers. But I had to laugh when you said that, Dr. Bedell. I mean, that's the age when many parents get a puppy, so someone's happy to see them when they get home. So it takes a lot to get middle schoolers excited. But I say that all tongue in cheek because I want to piggyback a bit off of what Dr. Tobin was saying, and that is the psychology of learning. And so I wanted to, and I share your thoughts there. I appreciate you stating them. I want to add another piece of the psychology of learning. There is a lot of research on summer learning loss, and there's still a lot of discrepancy in the research and how real it is and what it is. But I remember researching this and learning that a series of studies that were done where it showed, well, yes, students learn so many weeks of learning. This was particularly around math. But when they got back to school, 2 weeks later, they were all caught up. And in addition to that, what they had lost was, and I'm going to get the description wrong, but it was basically computational skills were lost, but the analytical skills were gained over the summer after being out of school. And so the important piece there is, yes, they didn't exercise or practice like if you're playing an instrument over the summer, right? So they were rusty, but their mind was better prepared to understand the math. That's what this one series of studies that I read. My point is, you said we do this diagnostic in the first 2 weeks, am I right, for the beginning of the year? And I'm wondering if week 3 to 4 would provide more meaningful data based on, again, the psychology of learning and then the studies that have been done on that. And my other question is, can you help me understand? I can totally understand what this looks like for math. I'm a little bit more fuzzy and apprehensive on developing reading skills through this type of a tool. Can you help understand what it is students are doing?
Absolutely. So let's see if I can jump back to the slide here. Oop.
Yep.
So I don't know if Michelle, you want me to take? I can take.
Yep, go ahead.
So those are kind of the overarching areas of reading abilities or reading concepts, right? So there's the phonological awareness, there's phonics. So this is understanding how to decode words. The phonological awareness is obviously the phonemes and understand discriminate between sounds. This obviously having them exposed to high frequency words or what we call sight words. So you can practice all these things online through this digital tool. It obviously can help you decode words. It'll break the words apart, give you sounds, have you kind of listen to the sounds. It breaks them apart. Vocabulary, obviously, exposure to a lot of vocabulary words. It could be domain specific, and of course, comprehension, which is the driver of all of it, right? So you're reading passages and you're responding to, if you're able to do some of the literary elements like main idea, identify supporting details, etc. So a lot of those skills. So again, it's getting out all of those. The missing piece, obviously, what you don't see there, I apologize, is the writing aspect. But it is getting at what we'd call really the big five of reading comprehension. It's able to do that. That's the program design of iReady itself.
All right, thank you.
Mhm.
Ms. Corkadell.
Thank you. So just a couple more quick questions. So if iReady is predicting the outcome of MCAP, then is it an assumption or a good analogy to suggest, or a suggestion, therefore, that iReady, the curriculum that's in there, and the learning materials are designed to meet the testing obligation? Like, in other words, are they structured to support the test, what's going to be on the test? Because I was a little confused when we were talking about its predictability.
No, this is all about standard alignment.
Okay.
If they are able to access the standards in which the state will then design its question stems based on those standards, right? Then we have alignment that we are getting our kids prepared for whatever it is the state's going to give us at the end of the year.
So this is supplementing the curriculum effectively, right? It's supporting, it's developing skills to support the student success within our curriculum, right?
Yeah, that's the purpose of this, is to help our kids be able to access grade level standards as articulated in our curriculum.
So are we able to have structural input into what is in iReady, or is this sort of that Common Core type of package that's everywhere in the nation's doing the same type of stuff?
Yes, so remember, it's twofold, right?
Mhm.
Part of it is criterion referenced, which means that it's based on the state of Maryland state standards.
Okay.
So any district that is utilizing iReady in the state of Maryland, we all kind of follow the same
Okay.
information that's being presented to our students. Nationally, they have it nationally normed, which basically allows for us to measure up against how we're performing against students across the United States. So what's beautiful about this is it generally, well, I don't know what was used here previously. I can tell you in my previous experience, we had an instrument that only gave us norm referenced data.
Yeah.
And that's why we were all over the place in my previous school district, and where our kids where we weren't able to show the growth and value add in learning until we ended up getting this instrument, which then aligned us with other districts in the state of Missouri that was also using it. So it gives you both.
Mhm.
But what we see is the same thing that other school districts in the state of Maryland are seeing too.
Okay. So it is all connected in the background. Okay, because that wasn't very evident to me. And then based on that, as our curriculum continues to grow and dynamically change, do we work with iReady to kind of tweak it or improve it, or is it just there's the state standard input and a little bit of work? Because when I hear things like, how can we do better for middle schoolers, that's all screaming customize it, or customizability, the ability to customize it. And so if that's the case, is there that potential of doing that, or is that something we just don't want to mess with because it's
So we have what's a state curriculum, right? And so those domains you're seeing respective to math and then reading. So you've got these domains, numbers and operations, algebra and algebraic thinking, etc. Those are aligned, or those are grounded in what's called the Maryland State Standards for College and Career Readiness. So that states the kind of the what students will know and be able to do. Then when we talk about some of the curricular programs that we may purchase, like a Reveal or like a pending English language arts elementary school program, those are programs that are already also aligned to those standards. So iReady is assessing students on those particular standards, domains and standards, because that's the state standard. And then anything we purchase curriculum wise will also comport with that. So all three will be layered and linked.
so even
And
though
if
a
this-
student, so even though a student isn't seeing the direct connection between their syllabi and what they are experiencing in iReady, it is
It is there.
actually connected
Yes.
and helping at the very least do a skill review if they're at the higher level. We would not want to abandon it for them, but supplement it like you were referring to, correct? Okay.
And if there are significant changes at the state level, I mean,
Well,
iReady's
going
on
to
top
be,
of that.
yeah.
So anytime there's standard
Yeah.
changes at the state level, they will then make the adjustments within their platform.
Okay.
And
Okay.
Ms. Corkadell, if I could just add, this also tool allows us to measure growth over time. So it's also a progress monitoring tool for us.
Yeah, that's why I was asking about how much of the data is following the student, because really that seems like a modeled profile that would benefit an educator in understanding, where if 90% of their students showed last year this major deficiency, I would presume that we would want to make adjustments, and that would be some of the data, not all of it, that we would use. Is that correct? So my second question then is, on average, we talk about planning time for teachers. And I always kind of wonder when we are bringing in and onboarding newer, and this is not totally a new program, but, and I'm not going to use the B word, I promise, when I say this, but yeah, bright space, which we knew had impacts to the staff. It seems like our staff has well integrated that. As we continue, as the state continues to change with blueprint and everything, is this, how much of a additional work planning, how much does it affect their planning time and the additional, is there, how much additional time of work does it impose on the educator, just to make sure that we're creating that accountability of balance? And that's why I was kind of asking, like, what's our outcomes anticipated? Because you always want to make sure that you're getting enough juice out of the lemon. Sometimes you need to go get a new lemon, and sometimes you need an orange when you were using a lemon. So that's why I was asking. Can you share some insight as to how staff, when we talk about buy-in and those differentials, sometimes, our conversations stem around how much time for planning, how much time for implementation for it. Could you elaborate on the impacts?
So I'll talk to the two components. The one, my path, that is strictly driven by the adaptive program of the computer and the device. So the planning piece there is really just the monitoring of students' time and use, and then also lessons passed that Dr. Duarte mentioned earlier. Then the teacher toolbox is prepared lessons specific to skills that are then ready-made for them to use in small group or one-on-one settings. So there is a component of time, certainly, with teachers in their planning and determining the instructional day for their students. But that is part of the total package and when it comes to planning and differentiating for our students. And we continue from our central office level with those guidance and expectations to refine and streamline appropriate use and not overuse of the tool. But they do in collaborative planning, in leadership meetings, in school improvement team meetings. This is often a data point that is reviewed, analyzed, and discussed.
Yeah, because I would assume would our students that are behind are also the ones who are most benefiting from tutoring, small group, one-on-one, pull-asides, summer learning. And so are we actually using the data, it sounds like, to help instruct that profile, and that tutor would have access to those deficiencies of where they were at the beginning of the year, where they are at mid, right?
Correct.
Okay, so by the time we get to the 10th grade, not in the next couple years, as we do transition, that the CCR readiness, it sounds like this would all line up with a way of us knowing before the sophomore goes to be assessed, if they are going to be well prepared. Is that
Correct.
good? Okay, I'm good. No more questions.
Thank you. Ms. Schallheim. Ms. Dent?
Okay, so my first question is about failure, pass and fail. So mental health wise, when someone take a test and they pass, they're excited. But when they fail, there's another, kind of pardon my colleagues, psychology to that learning, right? So is there any, and I know you're going to tell me you haven't evaluated this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Has there any research been done on the outcome of how students are affected when they fail so many times? And I only say that because I've been sick the last couple of days. I had a lot of time to read. There's a lot of students mad about iReady. I mean, a lot of students. And most of them are saying that because when they fail, they're sent back to, 5 or 6 tests they have to take. So it gets them all upset over and over. So it's lots of information. But what I worry about is, just how it feels. I know how I feel when I fail anything, right? So I just wonder if there's any work or research been done. I know it's a fairly new program. That's question one. And why are you thinking about that? And this may be for Dr. Bedell. He could think about it as well. Is that versus cost versus outcome, right? So when I look back at, and you can go back to the map that had the 0 achievement in the 7th, 0 outcome in 7th grade, right? So with the amount of money that's spent, does the cost equal the outcome? I just a question, not a specific answer. So go.
So regarding failure, the program is adaptive. So there shouldn't be much frustration with students as they're taking the diagnostic, because the program is designed to calibrate itself to a level which the student will be successful. And so even though the student may be sitting in 5th grade, if they start missing some of those 5th grade questions, it's going to roll it back to maybe 4th and 3rd grade, to which they'll start to experience some success. So there shouldn't be much frustration actually when taking the diagnostic in of itself. Now, after the fact, obviously it takes into account that, okay, you're a 5th grade student who just performed well, but you did on 3rd grade questions and items. It's going to then calibrate a scale score that shows that they are below grade level standards. Now, that's something that obviously is shared with the school and with the parents, but I'm not sure if a student's going to draw a straight line from their particular scale score to feelings of failure, and there should not be. So that's after the fact, but during, there should not be much frustration at all in terms of taking a diagnostic that you would not, like you take a test that, we all did in college and didn't prepare for, and you would get everything wrong. In theory, the kids should be getting most of the questions right. And then of course it does calibrate the scale score, which would show that they are below grade level when we look at those norm references we talked about earlier. But that would be something that their parents can share with them or not share with them. They don't necessarily need to know that per se. So I don't think there'd be much frustration when they
let me add on to that, because this absolutely isn't about a pass or fail diagnostic at all. And the only way that a kid will be feeling frustrated is then the delivery and the interpretation of the data and how that's being delivered to that student. So that's a whole nother conversation if kids are coming out feeling that way, because the reality is it's a really good tool for an educator to use to then know, hey, okay, so here's where you are. Here's our plan of action to take you to where we know you need to get to, and where we want to see you. And I think so. It's a whole different conversation with that approach. But no kid should ever be coming out feeling like, oh, I'm a failure because, I didn't do well in these particular standards. So that would, based on my experience with it. Oh, I thought you said just think about that. You didn't say you wanted an answer. So what we will do, I mean, over time, we'll take a look at it. We always have to look at return on investment. And part of that is the work that we will be doing as we do program evaluations. We've spoken with Mr. Dykstra and his team about how do we evaluate some of these things, these initiatives, and some of these things that we brought into this school district that where it's a pretty hefty price tag on it. And so we'll look at that. I think for me, we have to make sure that the implementation of this is done at a high level, and some of the things that we've gone back to do to kind of better educate our people on it. Generally action research, you want three years at minimum to be able to get some reliable data to use that then you can articulate to the community whether a product is working or not. So, I mean, I like I said, I wasn't really here for the first 2 years of it or whatnot. This is year 2. So with me being here, so I need a little bit more time.
Thank you. Mr. Lynn?
Okay, so a little context to my question. So, thinking back to what Dr. Tobin and Dr. Bedell said about how when kids get to middle school, sometimes there's this like disconnect. And then thinking back to my own brother who's in middle school now, and how his perception of iReady has changed. I'm just wondering, with the large amount of kids who are in that red zone in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade versus like 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, like, do you think that that is because kids maybe aren't necessarily trying on the diagnostics tests anymore because they just don't care as much, and so because they don't care to complete the diagnostic tests, they're just not trying on it, which is showing that they're falling behind when in reality maybe they're not. And is there like a safeguard built into it to kind of prevent that from happening? And if that is happening, is the data accurate in that sense, I guess?
Great question. So I think that's going to be on an individual case by case basis for the first student. But you bring up point that we've talked about tonight in the middle school student. I don't want to generalize them as all one. They're all each individuals, but certainly their effort into taking it seriously could impact what the diagnostic results show.
I'll follow with that as well. So what you're seeing in terms of the decline, in some ways precipitous, between elementary and middle school outcomes on iReady, that's consistent with all outcomes, right? So if you look at MCAP data, you'll typically see a drop as you get to middle school. Any assessment data, you typically see that decline. Some of it's a function of just a significant jump in terms of the learning expectations. So that's not on par. If we took pretty much any data, you would see where it typically falls off at the middle school level. And it's hard to compare middle school to elementary school. I know we did it there, but naturally your elementary scores, I should say, are usually going to be a little bit higher than middle school scores, is what I meant to say. I think in terms of your question, Eric, about students maybe not taking it seriously, I believe the program has some safeguards against that. So like if students are just clicking the same answer just to get through it, it will lock them out. Right. So if they rush through it too quickly, it will lock them out. So there's some safeguards to make sure that students are actually doing due diligence and putting in, at least ample levels of effort to complete the diagnostic. But I actually think what you're seeing right there in terms of that trend data is more of a function of juxtaposing elementary with middle school, whereas middle school scores are always lagging behind elementary school scores. And that's consistent across all systems, all assessments. It's just the nature of middle school because of where students are developmentally, but some of it is also the jump in learner expectations at that level comparative to what you're expected to learn and be able to do at the elementary level.
Got it. Yeah. So yeah, you brought up like MCAP scores going down, which is kind of what also stemmed my question is because I remember when I was middle school and we took like Park and like in elementary school it was like, really stressed. And then as we got to middle school, kids found out that they weren't graded on it. So it like didn't matter as much. And so because it didn't matter as much, they didn't try on it. So like I was just wondering if, and I feel like that's like the same thing with maybe these iReady scores is that like if they find once kids realize that it doesn't really matter as much like because they're not being graded on it per se that maybe that's that increase in the red but that was like kind of what I was thinking on the lines of.
Yes, we talk about these things. Absolutely.
It does raise a larger question about, I'll wait for the explosion, the value of grades. But anyway. Are they an end or a means? They tend to be looked at too often as an end, in my view, but that's just me. Are there additional questions from anyone? Okay, well, I think that concludes our questions. Thank you very much for this. We will take a brief break. Thank you.